Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we are going to jump right into a really core concept in Swift, something that'll help you write much cleaner, much more efficient code. We're talking about properties. We're going to break down the two main types, stored and computed, and see exactly how they help us manage our data. So let's just kick things off with a question for you. Think about your own projects for a minute. When you build a class or a struct, how are you actually handling the information that goes with it? This is the fundamental problem that properties are here to solve. Before we dive into the two different kinds, let's just make sure we're on the same page with the definition. A property is simply a value, like a number or some text, that's tied directly to an instance of a class or a struct. It's what gives our objects their personality, their unique characteristics. All right, first up, let's talk about stored properties. Honestly, the best way to think about these is as a simple box. Its only job is to hold something. That's it. A stored property is exactly what it sounds like, no tricks here. It's a piece of memory that your program sets aside specifically to hold a value. This is the most direct, most common type of property you're going to use. Think of it as just a variable or a constant that happens to belong to an object. Let's look at some actual code. Super simple. We've got a circle struct, and inside var radius double. That radius, that's a stored property. When we create a new circle, the program literally sets aside a little chunk of memory, our box, to physically store a number for that radius. So the big takeaway here is that stored properties are super straightforward. You declare them with var if the value might change, or let if it's going to stay the same forever. They always belong to an instance, and most importantly, they hold a real actual value in memory. Now, for our second type, and this is where things get really interesting. If a stored property is a box, a computed property is more like a calculator. It doesn't hold a value, it figures one out. And this is the absolute key difference. A computed property doesn't store any data itself. Instead, every single time you ask for its value, it runs a little piece of code to calculate it right there on the fly. It's totally dynamic. Here's what that looks like back in our circle struct. See, we still have our stored property radius, but now we've added area. Notice there's no equal sign, no value being stored. Instead, there's a block of code that returns a value. So every time we access myCircle.area, it takes the current radius, runs that calculation, and gives us the fresh result. Now, there are a few important rules here. A computed property must be a var because its value can technically change, right? If radius changes, the calculated area will change too. It does this calculation every time you access it, and it almost always depends on other properties. This calculation part is called a getter, and you can also add an optional setter to define what happens if someone tries to assign a value to it. Okay, so we've met the box and the calculator. Let's put them side by side. Time for the showdown to make the difference crystal clear. The difference is pretty stark when you see it like this. The box stores a value directly in memory. The calculator figures it out when you ask. The box can be a constant, let, or a variable, var. The calculator has to be a var. But really, the fundamental difference is this. A stored property is a piece of data. A computed property is a piece of logic. It's basically a function that's disguised to look and feel like a property. So we get the what. But the bigger question is why? Why do we even have these two different types? Why does this distinction actually matter when you're writing code every day? Well, the benefits for your code quality are huge. By making area a computed property, you write that calculation logic just one time, not scattered all over your app. That's a big win. This also keeps your data perfectly consistent. If the radius changes, the area automatically reflects that change without you doing anything. And you save memory because you're not storing a value that can be easily figured out from other data you already have. This quote really just sums it all up perfectly. Stored properties are for your core, essential data, the stuff that defines your object. Computed properties are your helpers. They give you these convenient, reusable, and always up-to-date ways to work with that core data. So if you remember just one single thing from this entire explainer, please let it be this. That's it. It is that simple. Stored properties are the nouns, the pieces of information. Computed properties are the verbs, the actions or calculations that you perform on that information. One is, the other does. And that brings us to the end. The next time you're coding, I want you to ask yourself this question. Where in my code do I have a variable that only exists to hold the result of a calculation from other properties? That is a perfect opportunity to refactor it into a computed property. making your code cleaner, safer, and way more efficient. Thanks for watching.